Welcome back to We Move Through Stormy Weather, a Phish podcast where we compare and contrast songs and the evolution of their jamming styles throughout the band's career. My name is Ryan Storm, and today I am joined by Joel Cummins. Joel is a founding member and the resident keyboard wizard for Umphrey's McGee and a longtime Phish fan. Outside of the music world, Joel is a best-selling author, releasing The Realist Guide to a Successful Music Career, which features an array of musical and music business advice and includes conversations with musical greats. Joel, say hi.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Nice to be here with you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm so excited to dive into one of Phish's most iconic songs with you today, the one and only Harry Hood.
There it is. There it is. Definitely a top 10 for me. And, one of these interesting pieces of music that, even though it has lyrics that are, one of the best sing-along moments at a Phish concert that you'll get, it's a mostly instrumental tune.
Yeah, and what an instrumental tune it is. So many distinct moving parts, so much going on. And I know you want to, not only do you want to dive into the specific version that you picked, but you want to dive into the song itself. And I'm really excited to get into that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few general comments, for people out there that are kind of into this sort of thing, that are musicians or into music theory, just about kind of what's happening. And so, Harry Hood is a song that kind of takes you on a journey from starting in this deep D minor reggae pocket that eventually ends up in a D major Ionian mode, meaning that it's got the D major and then the like A major and G major are all chords that fit on there. You're not using the C natural really much. So, and I'd say Ionian mode is probably like the second most commonly used major key for rock bands, or major mode for rock bands. Mixolydian being the more popular one, but when you do hit those moments, it's one of those that particular chord progression, the outro, is a very joy-inducing experience.
Oh, yes.
For whatever reason, and the first half of it is kind of a contrast to that. And there's certainly plenty of little major chord movements in there too, but more than not, we're looking at a minor key, and as we were just talking about a little bit before the podcast started here, the "Thank You, Mr. Minor" section is a Locrian mode thing. This kind of super evil guitar riff that goes gradually up the keyboard as far as what key you're in, till finally you end up on the EA progression that leads us to the outro. So I think there's some great tension that's built in those final Locrian moments before you get to the resolution of the big major chords.
Yeah, and you see that a lot in in a number of Trey's earlier compositions. Like Yem definitely has, some of them aren't as significant, but Yem definitely has Fluffhead, the ending Bundle of Joy part before
Sure.
Arrival. Divided Sky, I think, has a moment like that before the ethereal part with the pause. But it's a really cool, the tension building. I love that. It's, I think, very common praise given to Phish about the tension and release, and it's really cool when it's built into the compositions like this. Definitely.
Yeah, no doubt. And so then the other big significant thing I would say that it's musically really interesting, and also equally gets the crowd just as excited when it happens live, is the kind of mixed meter thing that's going on. You know, where the band and Fishman are kind of in different places, and all the band is playing together, and Fishman's kind of sticking to 4/4, and then adding some extra beats at the end of measures to make it come around. But that's a super effective use of that very unusual technique.
Oh yeah, and another reason why John Fishman is absolutely insane, because it's so hard for me to like focus on his part and not mess up counting in my head even when I'm listening to the song, and I can't imagine playing that. Similar to like how Trey and Page like chase each other through the melody in Reba.
Sure.
Like that's just a really cool thing of going on a completely different time signature or a different beat than the rest of the band.
Yeah, and this is pretty common knowledge, but Fishman is also incredibly dedicated to his craft and working
Yes.
on his stuff individually. And I think Harry Hood's a good example of where he's often like the underlying shining cog. Where if you listen to his parts specifically, you're like, oh wow, that's also going on underneath there, huh? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And particularly, I mean, his role in the final build is really important, and I'm glad we got these two different fairly different versions that we picked here, where a few different things happen, a couple unexpected things, I would say.
Yes. Now, do you want to start off, talk a little bit about the version you picked, which is December 5th, 1995?
Yeah, so this is from the Mullen Center. They're kind of the end of their fall tour, and I know a lot of people are very into the 94, 95 Harry Hoods, and that's with good reason.
Special
Um,
breed.
yeah, yeah. And, this one is pretty cool because it seems like they're really holding back on reaching the apex of the jam. And so as a result, there's this kind of continual exploration vibe that just keeps you right on the edge. And Trey and Mike are playing around a little more with the one in five scale degrees, meaning like the D and the A. There's a lot of emphasis on the five, which is not very typical for what Trey typically plays. So I think that's a significant thing that happens. Finally, when they do kind of get to the where Mike's pedaling the D bass and Trey's playing the D A G chords over the top, they
Hmm.
bring it back down one more time before he really fires off into the stratosphere
Yeah, I
with a
remember. Well,
final
I'm
riff.
glad you recommended this version because I hadn't heard this one before, and when I was listening to it a few days ago to make notes, I remembered that final when it seems like they're almost about to hit the "You Can Feel Good" and then they go back down again. That was so like caught me completely off guard, and it's like one of the things I love most about Phish is their ability to continuously surprise me like that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think so. One of the things that both of these versions have in common is that, and this is true for most of the end of versions of live Harry Hoods, is that dynamically, Trey really keeps things at a lower level for a pretty long time, and it's just such a delicate piece of music every time, and so to hear that sort of patience, to be able to keep things so restrained, is really exciting to listen to as a musician.
Yeah, and I love the patience exhibited by them in so many different jams around that period, like December '95, like the Slaves and the Rebas and the Hoods, of course. Like it's so amazing to listen to. Like one specific that comes to mind, I think it's the show right after this, the Niagara Falls show. The Slave from that one for most of the jam, Trey is just playing the A G D E chord progression and not even soloing or anything, and it's just such a patient jam, and I love it. I love it.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
So that's probably my general thoughts about the 95 version. I think it also, um, the tempo does feel a little bit faster in that one, which is also indicative of younger
95. Yeah.
younger musicians, and you know probably enjoying themselves out there. So as they
Of
should be,
course.
as
Of
they should
course.
be.
Yes.
But yeah, I like the slightly more aggressive tempo as well.
Yeah. So the version I picked, one of my favorite versions of Hood, November 1st, 2018, from Vegas, the day after the fabled Casfoot Facts show. And also, for those of you who don't know already, fall 2018 is my favorite Phish tour. But this version, I think, similar to the 1995 one in the respects that they're both kind of type 1.5. They don't quite leave the hood structure, but they do a little bit. This one's really cool because it has some very smooth "We Are Come to Outlive Our Brains" teasing
Whack
in the
tube.
middle of the jam. Whack tube. Great song, and I love for the other few shows of that Vegas run after the Halloween show how they teased a few of the songs, and they came in. It came in so naturally here, just before the 7-minute mark when Mike just brings in the bass line, and the crowd reacts immediately.
I think is it Fishman who sings it first, or is it Mike playing the bass line?
Mike brings in the bass line first, and then there's about a minute of them essentially playing Whack
Yeah,
Tube.
and Page
Um,
switches to the whirly, I think, right?
yes, the
Yeah.
Wurlitzer. Yeah, and Fishman catches on to Mike almost immediately and switches drum beats to that of the jam. And it's really cool because after the Whack Tube piece, it sounds like they're going full force, like they're going right for the peak, and that's going to be it. And it's going to be like, oh, fun hood with a Whack Tube tease. But Trey decides he's not done yet, and I think 20 seconds after that, like initial burst of energy, he quiets back down and, you know, funks it up a little bit. The classic, I think, very common theme for leaving the song structure that we've seen in the past few years is when Trey will hit a big minor chord strum on his guitar and then gets a little funky.
Yeah, they kind of go to a bluesier feel there. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the switch back to D minor a little bit.
Yeah, and there's a really, really great ebb and flow, like of intensity, for the next few minutes of the jam, where they kind of like tease us a little bit, which is interesting to contrast it with the 1995 version because it's a different kind of patience and a different kind of teasing around the peak, because they're not as tight as they were 23 years before, and they're not as young, so they can't play as fast, and but it's still really cool to the versions do bear some similarities to me, at least to my ear. Like it's really cool to listen to, even though they're so different and the gear that they're using is so different and has evolved so much. Like if you think about, at least for Page in 1995, he had no Wurlitzer, he didn't have his synth, like, it was very different, and it's cool to listen to the evolution of the sound, which is,
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
and thank God he has a Wurlitzer now because that's one of my favorite tools that he has.
Yeah, I've used one in the studio for a bunch of Umphrey stuff, but they are pretty difficult to maintain. So unfortunately, I haven't brought one out on the road. But
I didn't know that.
they're pretty. awesome instruments. Well, and the difference between, the Rhodes and the Whirly is that the Rhodes has a metal tine, so when the hammer strikes it, you have this like kind of thicker resonating sound, and with
Yeah,
the Whirly they're plastic, so
it's flatter.
yeah, it's well, and just more potential to break. I mean, don't get
Right.
me wrong, I've broken plenty of tines in my time and cursed myself, but it's a completely different ballgame for sure.
That's interesting. I didn't know about the fragility of that instrument before. I wonder if Page has broken one, because I know he had his little pumpkin for like almost 10 years, I think. And then he got a bigger full size one in 2019. Um, yeah,
Interesting.
it's so cool to discover things like that, because I thought like the most difficult part of Page's rig to maintain would be the grand piano that has to be tuned twice a day.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean that's more of just a pain in the ass, I think.
yeah,
But the same for clavinets. Clavinets can require a decent amount of work too. So I think that's why a lot of people don't take one out, because musicians don't want to spend time trying to fix their keyboards. They want to
right.
spend time playing.
Playing them,
So
of course,
so unless you have a tech at your disposal that is willing to take
which
on
he
that
does.
responsibility, yeah, he does. He
And
does. So.
honestly, that's kind of my dream job. So
Yeah, I've chatted with Eddie once. I have we have some friends that are on the crew, so we've been to. My wife works in the music business too, so I've gone to more 3.0 shows on her behalf, and I started out going to shows in '94, but once Humphreys got going, it was a better idea for me to just kind of step back and step away, because you don't want your original music to mimic something you love too much,
yeah, I remember I was listening to a podcast in the spring with Barber from the Disco Biscuits, and he said he stopped going to Phish shows because he had started playing like Trey with the Disco Biscuits.
Yeah, right, right. So, I mean, I don't think the good thing is, for me, I don't think that there's as much of a thing where it's like, oh, I would start playing like Page. It's definitely more of a guitar player thing
Right,
for Phish.
right.
Um, but yeah, it was going back to '94 when I discovered them. It was kind of a thrill for me to find a band that had an essential keyboardist who did not also have to be the lead singer.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
it's a
yeah, I think it's really cool, because in a lot of big bands, I think the keyboardist isn't usually the front man, and if they are, they're more of a lead singer than a keyboardist.
yeah, and it's intimidating. You think about Stevie Wonder, Donny
Yeah,
Hathaway, Billy Joel, Elton John, Bruce Hornsby. These guys are all outstanding singers, in
yeah,
addition to being pretty mind blowing players themselves.
oh
So,
yeah,
it's a lot of pressure.
yeah. Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, and singing and playing, of course, as we both know, adds another level of difficulty to it. At
Yeah.
the same time. Anyway, let's tie it back to the topic at hand. Um, I know one thing I noticed about the 1995 versions, which I love about kind of the late 90s, is Trey's use of the Leslie effect,
Mm.
which he also used a lot in 2018, but isn't really present in this specific jam. But I think he had a different Leslie speaker back then, I know, so it has really kind of a really warm sound in this hood, and he uses it in the intro and in the jam. I have a note from this 1995 version that's just the Leslie in all caps with 3 exclamation marks.
Yeah.
Sometimes my notes are comprehensive, and sometimes they are just me freaking out about things that are happening.
Yeah, well, for those of you guys listening that are wondering, what is the Leslie? The Leslie is typically it's a speaker that is used with the Hammond B3 organ, and it has a spinning high end and low end speaker, and I think they spin in
They
opposite
spin in
direction.
opposite directions, yeah.
Yeah. So you really need to mic both the top and the bottom to get the full effect. But if you think about, like the flutter of the organ, that sort of sound, that's your Leslie on fast. And when it's on slow, it kind of has more of like a phasery sound to it.
Yeah.
So you can, switch it back and forth between those two things. Some also have the ability to stop as well.
Yeah.
But
I'm not a fan of when people playing an organ stop the Leslie.
yeah, neither. It's
Yeah, it sounds super nasal, and I just
Yeah, it's all about the movement. It's got to have that movement to it. So,
yeah.
anyway, kind of just like what you were saying. There are some people who use it for guitar, and I think, yeah, Trey. You said Trey brought it out in '94.
Yeah, I believe he got it in 95. Not
95.
100% sure. It might have been late 94, early 95. But I know by fall 95 he was using it a fair amount. And through 97 and stuff, you can hear it in a lot of his not only soloing but his kind of like melodic work, like in beginnings of Hood jams and stuff like that, and when he wants to get quieter. And then he didn't really use it for, I think he carried it around for the majority of 3.0 without using it, I think, basically at all. And what's interesting to me is that in the 90s he had, it was like a small, not sure what kind of Leslie it was, but not like a full Leslie speaker like you use with an organ. And then when Phish came back in 09, he was using like a huge full, wooden Leslie cabinet with which is crazy to me to lug that around for the guitar.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Well, the good thing is they're not that heavy. It's
Oh,
the
they're not?
No, they're not. It's the B3 that's actually really heavy.
Mm.
But I think
The Leslie just takes up a lot of space.
yeah, no doubt. I think maybe he'd been using a solid state one before
That
using
sounds right.
before using the full cabinet, which that would fit a little better like on top of a guitar amp or wherever they had it sitting.
Yeah, that's where it was.
So he might actually not have had the lower speaker, and some of the like I used one by a company called Motion Sound that was pretty popular for making them back before I got a B3, and so it had a quarter-inch out for the bass, and that it only spun with the top. So I think it was, just so you would get that full sound, but part of it was not real.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he also, I'm not sure if this is true, but it sounds a little bit like he might be running a mixed wet dry signal from it, so you kind of get the
That
regular
would make
guitar
sense.
tone
Yeah,
as well as the Leslie, and it mixes so well with his 1995 guitar tone, which is incredible.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm it's actually interesting that he doesn't use it in this Vegas Hood from 2018, because it is all over pretty much, I think, every big jam from 2018, especially from the summer of that year. He just, I'm not sure what whether he got a new Leslie at the end of 2017 or someone was like, hey, you should use the Leslie more, but he started really diving into that effect in 2018, and I love it. And then Trey, if you're listening, you should bring back the actual speaker instead of the rotary pedal that he was using in 2019, which doesn't have the same kind of stereo effect to it. To me, it sounds more like a vibrato or a phaser, as opposed to like the authentic Leslie sound. But
You can't beat the real thing. That's what it
oh,
comes down to.
for sure. And what one thing, because so when I listen to these two versions of Hood, I listen to them one after another pretty much. And one thing that struck me was the difference in the final peak. So both of them have big peaks, obviously, as Hood does, and both of them feature Trey, slamming a solo in the. Both of them feature Trey slamming a solo. But what's interesting to me is to compare the way that he solos in both. So the 1995 one, obviously, he's playing a lot more notes. It's faster. Um, and in 2018, he's doing that thing that he's been doing lately in peak jams, which is like just hitting big, like power. I I want to say like the power chord equivalent of like a big high note. Which is, it has a lot of energy and strength to it, I think, which is interesting, especially that's also probably as a result of the difference in the amps that he's using and his tone. Because in 2018 he was using the Comet amps, so his tone was definitely more distorted, higher gain. So
Hmm.
it's really
Hmm.
interesting to compare and contrast this because, um, you know, it's these jams are a lot more similar than the chalk dusts that I compared in episode 1 or the tubes that I compared in episode 2. Um, and that's I think I kind of consciously picked the Vegas one after you told me about the 1995 one, and I was kind of, after I listened to it, and I was kind of mulling over, I was thinking about maybe this one or the Providence 2019 one, or trying to pick a good 3.0 version. Obviously, the ones from 2013 and 14 that were big, but I think it's really interesting to look at the similarities between the two.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt, and it's a long time. It's 23 years between these two versions. So, um,
23 years, a hiatus, a breakup, an arrest. A lot
yeah,
happened.
yeah, right.
Um, One thing I do also want to mention about the Vegas one is Page on the Roads at the beginning of the jam. Now, Page on the Roads might be my favorite thing in music ever. Especially with the heavier phaser effect he's had on it the past few years.
Yeah, right.
It's so good and silky smooth, and that's when I my Rhodes patch in main stage when I play is that heavier phaser sound, because I love the way it adds like an ambience to the jam, and it really sets a vibe.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. The ambience of the roads, and to me, one of the biggest differences between the roads and the whirly is that you've got an opportunity for a little more sustain, and to be able
Mm.
to kind of lay a bed of sound. Whereas the whirly, has this, if you're using the tremolo, it has a little more like otherworldly effect to it. Well, yeah, the Rhodes. One of the things that I've done over the years is I've got a Moger Foger delay pedal up there, and so I've got it set up.
Mm.
It's got a little LFO knob on it as well, so I'll set it up so that it's got some additional kind of, it's really messing with the pitch just a little bit to kind of give it this waving sound. So similar to that, what a phaser would do. But really creating a nice like kind of ghostly decay. So that's something
Yeah.
when a lot of space opens up that I think a Rhodes can sound really great with. And obviously, I would say it's like I wish Page would play it a little more, honestly. But I think yeah, it's such a great sound for him, and he's I especially like the major key stuff that he does with the Rhodes. That's what jumps out at me.
Yeah, I think definitely he started using it more recently. I think pre 2017, he was still, or for Phish mostly up until then, he wasn't using the Rhodes as much and was relying a lot more on the clav or the organ or the piano. Um, and the Wurlitzer in early 3.0, I think the Wurlitzer gets used a lot more heavily. But I don't know what Phish did to change their mix or the way the sound was recorded, but it sounds different starting in 2017. And the Rhodes and the Wurlitzer are a lot more prominent in the mix since then. And with the addition of, I don't know if it was the synth that made Page start using them more, but he's used the Wurlitzer a lot more. And I think he might feel the same way as us with the phaser sounds a lot better on the Rhodes because he's been using it a lot more since that came about. And there have been a couple of jams where he'll he'll have one hand on the Wurlitzer and one hand on the Rhodes, and like playing the same melody line, which sounds so cool. Yeah, because you've got kind of the ambience of the Rhodes sound with the flatter, funkier sound of the Wurlitzer, and it's phenomenal. One also wow. One other thing. I'm just not speaking well today. One other thing that's kind of different about these two jams is that the 1995 one doesn't really totally go minor key in the same way that the 2018 one does. You know, there's a conscious switch to like a minor key funk groove, or like just before the 10-minute mark, I think, of the Vegas one. And it's cool because one thing that they've done recently with hoods, which in the past couple of years, I think Hood has made kind of a resurgence as a jam vehicle. While every version may not go full Type 2 or be absolutely groundbreaking, I think there's a lot more versions nowadays than early 3.0 that get out there a little bit and have a little bit of, quote unquote, extra mustard, as they like to say. But it's cool when they have like a big minor key peak, and then, go back into the Hood transition after that. Which I want to play this clip from the Vegas one. It's just before the 13-minute mark, big minor key peak, and then they just go right back into the Hood theme after. It's perfect. I just absolutely love how smooth that transition is. They have that huge minor key peak, and all four of them immediately dialed in right back into the DAG progression, right back into that beautiful, beautiful Hood jam. And I just like comparing the two jams in that sense, looking at how dialed in improvisationally the four of them are in the 2018 version versus how dialed in chops wise they are in the 1995 one. You look at the 1995 one, they were still getting their improvisational sea legs, so to speak. A lot of the jams and at that point were still very like noise based and
Sure.
still getting the hang of it. They hadn't yet reached the funk breakthrough of 97 and late jams. And one thing I really like about 2018 is that what they sacrifice in speed and technical proficiency, they make up for, I think, more than make up for in improvisation. And it's just so fantastic to listen to how, in my favorite period of Phish, which is July 2017 to February 2019, they're on stage, they're playing with such confidence, and even though they're not hitting every note, even though it's a bit slower, they're getting into a jam and they're moving from one idea to the next with such purpose, and it's so great for me to listen to because you don't truly know where a jam's going to go. Because listening to the late 90s, like fall 97 or fall 99, for example, I know if I'm going into a long jam, it's going to be funk or it's going to be a really long ambient groove. And I like the how multifaceted it's been the last few years.
Yeah, there's definitely some. I'm not sure what the word is. Serendipity, osmosis going on with when they get from that minor peak and then eventually go back to D major. It's such as a listener, that's one of those things that you're waiting for with Harry Hood, with the kind of
Mm.
the beauty of the the major peak there. And yeah, that's always a fun one to do live. I know Phish is very good about using kind of oral cues and maybe a little bit of visual stuff, but like with Umphrey's, we will have kind of using a smile or a frown if we want to go from minor to major, major to
Oh,
minor.
interesting.
It's yeah, so you have to interpret that. I'm like, oh man, he's definitely not having this good of a time. I think he's thinking, let's go major here.
That's really interesting. I like that kind of signaling. For me, when I'm improvising, like when we're jamming with me, my dad, and my brother, we just kind of go. My dad or I, because my brother's on drums, so he doesn't really factor into the major and minor. But my dad or I, one of us will just, one of us will like hit a chord or something to change the pace. We're not, we're working on getting it smoother. But that's really cool that you guys do like a smile or a frown. That's a really interesting strategy, and I like it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of took some stuff from the Zappa realm of
Mm.
using visual cues a little bit. We have like the guitar players and Ryan, our bassist, can do this, but the like motion of pulling the neck of the guitar up a few times in a row is saying like, let's go up to the relative major or minor, and
Oh,
going down is down to the relative major or minor. So we'll use
wow,
that
the
one too.
Umphrey's improvisational secrets right here. That's
Yeah.
that's really cool. I really like that. Yeah, how do you guys um like is there a specific way you approach different songs improvisationally? Like do you have certain songs that you're more likely to take super dark or because I know Fish kind of
Yeah,
has that, or do you guys just kind of go wherever it takes you on any given night?
I mean, I'd say there are definitely some songs that either lend themselves more naturally to a Mixolydian jam or an Ionian major jam or something that's a little darker, either on the Phrygian side or the Dorian, that sort of vibe. But I think at the same time we kind of look at whatever we have on the set list, and one of the things we're probably thinking about is let's not do the same type of jam three times in one set. And I think
Right.
that's something that Fish has done a great job of mixing up. As they've gotten to be a more mature band. You're kind of referencing a lot of the noisier jams of '95. If you listen back to like '93, and those were kind of for me. I hear like the real roots of brilliant improvisation there, with them
Hmm.
changing tempos and changing keys and doing some really unique, unusual stuff.
Yeah,
And
the you
go
really
ahead, go
look
ahead.
at the something like the Murat Gin from '93, and
Sure,
that's really
yep.
like that's like the birth of it, and you can really see like what's to come.
And there was that the Wild Atlanta show at the Roxy that I
Yes,
think a lot of the fan base will be familiar with too. But I've obviously heard those, and then
debut of
to
the Baby Grand.
there you go. And then to be at the I was at the Ann Arbor '94 show, and that's one with just like a crazy Mike Simple. And then my daughter was also born on November 16th, so that became an important date for me in the future as well.
That's cool.
26 years later.
Yeah.
But they went off into some really cool, dark, like uncharted waters there, and that was my second show. And so to me, that was something. You know, we talked about this, I think, a little bit about how when you find a band that you really like, you you go to one show and then you go to the next show. An improvisational band, I should say, and that show, I was like, oh my God, completely different than the first show I saw this summer.
Yeah.
That was pretty mind blowing for me. And a quick shout out to Jeremy Welsh, who's also a big fan and is the Umphrey's webcast, or I should say webmaster now. But he and
Ooh.
I found him. I couldn't find anybody to go to that show with me in 1994. Driving from South Bend, we were students at Notre Dame, and I put an ad in the newspaper, and that's how Jeremy and I met.
You put an
Yeah,
ad in a newspaper, and does anyone want to go to a Fish concert with me?
I could not find anyone to go with me. I
That's
mean,
awesome.
people didn't know Fish that much in the Midwest yet. In like 94,
Got it.
and then by like 95, 96, it was like, oh wow, now everybody knows. It was crazy.
You're like, I was there first. None of you answered my ad
Oh yeah,
last year.
oh yeah, I held it over their heads. I sure
Yeah, it
did.
must have been really cool to see them from tour to tour back then in the 90s because the sound was evolving so much then. And, even, I mean, their sound has evolved over the course of the 7 shows I've seen, of course, but not in the same drastic way. Their jamming style has definitely improved significantly since when I first saw them in 2012. But that's a result of them having to recalibrate after the breakup. Trey said in a SiriusXM interview a couple of years ago that he doesn't see, as I think a lot of people share this viewpoint, that they didn't really get their improvisational chops back like fully. They didn't get their mojo back until 2013, and you really see the turning point with something like the Tahoe Tweezer. It's like, oh look, 36-minute jam. They hadn't played anything to that scale in the past, in the first 4 years of 3.0 leading up to that.
Yeah, right.
So it's cool to look at the evolution of that coming back off of the breakup.
I saw somebody talking about I think it was November 28th, 2009, as being one of the first shows back where, as an audience member, they felt like they really hit some big peaks that measured up to the 1.0 and 2.0 era. So I want to listen back to that show. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, the Albany 7
Albany.
Below Ghost.
Yep.
Yeah,
yes,
the
exactly.
back-to-back 20-minute jams. Yeah. Like that was for sure the first like they're back moment. Now I do enjoy those jams, but I do think that they're a little bit overhyped, and I don't, they're fantastic for that era. I think I saw I believe it was Tropaganda on Twitter a couple days ago said that that's the best show of 2009 to 2011, and I'm inclined to agree with him because
I always
first 3 years
I always disagree with him just out of principle.
Yeah, I mean I disagree with him on a lot of things, and he does not my 3.0 favoring takes. But
he's a buddy. He's a buddy of mine, so I can say that.
Yeah. There was a lot more hesitancy in their playing in the first few years because I'm assuming Trey mostly didn't want to you have to dip your toes back in before diving into the pool. He didn't want to just go headfirst back into the huge, deep, crazy jams because he's just coming off of sobriety. Like at that time, he was only 2 years sober.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily, though, that plays into like a desire to be creatively more out there. But I think that it definitely, I think they got back to the point where he probably felt like there was something to prove, which is, and I think a lot of, you can see this and he talks about this too, that he's really focused a lot more on vocals in the past couple of years. And I think with the 3.0 era, the kind of the lyric and vocal stuff was something that he was really intensely focused on. And, this last album, Sigma Oasis, is kind of, for me, I feel like all of that coming to fruition. I mean, it's a really solid, all of his melodies and vocal performances are really great. So
without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think that, there was probably a little bit different of a focus in the beginning as well. And wanting to come up with, I get this as a musician, you don't want to just come back and play all your old stuff the same way that you did. And, as somebody who's, trying to be creative too, you always want to be working on new material and getting new things out in front of the fans and hopefully making new fans with that new material too, which is it's a tall order.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And, definitely, they definitely did have something to prove in 2009 because their whole thing was, I mean, as much as I hate referencing, the letter and the breakup in 2004, Trey's point in the letter was he didn't want to become a nostalgia act. They didn't want to become Phish. They were great in the 90s. Like, you should go see them. They're playing Rift in its entirety on this tour.
I'd go see that.
I think, well, of course we'd all go see that. That would be fantastic. Because Rift is an incredible album, but it's so cool because they've gone so over and above that I think, I mean, I was 9 years old and was not aware of the band at the time of the 2009 reunion. Um, but back then, coming off of that year, like at the end of 2009, if you had, you know, I don't know if people would have necessarily believed they'd reach the heights that they've reached in 2017 to 2019, like improvisationally and just in general with their music, and something like Casfoot Vaxxed and Chilling Thrilling Sounds of the Haunted House. And I think they've put themselves out there so much over the modern era, and it's so cool to watch. Because
Yeah, I think
realistically,
it's
they could have ridden the coattails of the '90s, and they could have just, they could just tour and play the hits and, you know, do whatever, and we'd all still go see them, obviously, because they're the greatest band ever.
As
No
Phil
offense,
Collins
no
would
offense to
say.
Umphrey's.
I'm
Um,
not offended. I'm not even in my top 100. So, um, but as Phil Collins would say, against all odds, Ryan, against all odds,
yes,
and they brought it back, and now we're getting to experience another golden era of their creative process and history.
yeah, because and that's kind of what makes the lack of shows this year even worse, because if you look at the kind of pattern over the last 5 or 6 years, they have a really strong year or two, and then they kind of take a step back, and like for a year. So if you look at 2015, coming off a fairly super strong year, um, Trey was in fantastic form, lots of amazing jams and playing throughout that year, and then 2016 saw kind of a transition, and kind of, you know, Trey took a step back, and summer 2016 was kind of a really inconsistent tour. But then the year after was the Baker's Dozen, and I think that gave them the wave, and that allowed they rode that wave into 2018 as well. And 2019 they kind of stepped back, and they're incorporating Ghost of the Forest songs and incorporating Casa Vax songs into the set lists, and all this stuff, shaking it up.
I don't
Um,
know, man. I might argue against 2019 step back. Now maybe I just got lucky because I went to the three shows that summer. The last night of Alpine Valley,
uh,
um, the
well,
second, yeah. I've I flew like three flights and went like 500 miles on a bus to get there from an Umphrey show to go hang
worth
out
it.
with. Yeah. I met up with my wife and her friends over there, and yeah, that was. I was extremely proud of my travel day.
Yeah. What were the other two that you saw last summer?
I saw the Saturday Camden show, which I know the Sunday one was a little bit better, but I was gonna be playing at Electric Forest that night, so couldn't stay for Sunday. But
Mm.
yeah, it was Jefferson Waffles' bachelor party, so
Ah,
yeah, that was a great time. I flew in for one night to Philly and then went back to Michigan.
you missed the rainstorm though, which was good. That was on the first night, I think.
I did miss the rainstorm. Yes. Oh no,
Shout out to
hey.
my mother who went with my dad to those shows. Did not
Nice.
enjoy the rain.
Oh, yeah, we were
um,
covered. We were covered. So no, I do remember the rainstorm was the second night, but
oh, it was okay.
I think I was out to dinner at that point.
Ah, got it,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah.
Yeah. So the only show I caught last year was the Toronto show. And although I think it is vastly underrated, I think in what I meant by kind of a shakeup is they kind of went back, like they weren't playing with the same purpose. I think for most of the tour, I mean, Alpine Night 3 is the obvious exception there, because
Right.
that show is ridiculous. Um, but I think the Mexico shows at the beginning of the year saw them, and the MSG shows at the end of 2019 saw them. They were like stepping back into it. Obviously you saw stuff like the MSG Tweezer, and the flow of some of the sets over the MSG and Mexico shows. Like, they were incredible. And while sure the jams, like, we're not getting a 20-minute jam as often as we were, like the only 20-minute jam that we've had two 20-minute jams since Dick's 2019, which is the Mercury from Dick's and the MSG Tweezer. And it's interesting to look at something like Fall 2019, which is so maligned by everybody. And I think
Yeah,
there's
it was
so
an
much good
experiment, right?
improvisation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. It was a short 1 week run, 8 shows, I think, no
I
repeats. And
I went to
yeah,
the three Charleston shows. A couple of my bandmates and our manager live in Charleston,
you
so
got to
we
be
would.
there for Chalk Dust Reprise, you lucky bastard.
It was kind of funny, honestly. That really saved that night.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
But it's funny. Like Al Schneer is also one of my buddies. He plays guitar for Mo, and he has a place down there. And we were talking. We were hanging out on Sunday, and after those first two shows, it was one of those things where it's just like, oh man, like why even try to be a band when these guys, like, anything they could do was just, they made all the right decisions,
Right.
and
The wrong
Sunday we
decisions had to go somewhere.
yeah, Sunday we needed more pick me ups. Everybody was crushed from 2 nights of awesomeness. So,
Yeah.
uh, but we had a great time. I had my daughter with me at that show, so she had a good time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I
But
just that Chalk Dust Reprise, I first listened to the Moby Dick show, I think, in like mid 2018, and I was like, they need to play Chalk Dust Reprise again. And I was campaigning for it for so long. And then they sound checked it in Providence, I think, and people were like, "Oh my god, they sound checked Chalk Dust Reprise." And I was like, "They sound checked Chalk Dust Reprise." And I was freaking out for the entire week when they played Chalk Dust at the Met. I thought they were going to encore with it
right,
then,
right,
and
would
I
make
was going to be
sense, right?
really upset because there was no video webcast, and I was like, I need to see Trey's face when this happens. And I kind of lost hope in the encore of Charleston Night 3. They did Pebbles and then Beneath the Sea of Stars, and then when they started Isabella, I was like, okay, this will close the show. Like, great, it works. And then my dad actually ruined it for me because I think my webcast was like 30 seconds behind or something, and he texted me OMG as Isabella was ending on my screen, and then I knew that it happened, but it didn't stop me from screaming and running around my apartment for the duration of the song.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, that was cool. But it was, it was nice to be down there for a 3 night run. I think that is also the first venue that I've been to a Phish show at that Umphrey's, that I played with Umphrey's before I saw Phish there. So
Oh, nice. When did you guys
yeah,
play there?
I want to say it was 2016, maybe 2015. It was the funny joke behind this is that the shows weren't booked there. We had to move them there after our festival. Like, it had been so rainy that like the concert site was just completely waterlogged. It would have been a
Oh man.
disaster. Yeah. So fortunately that venue was there, but we. Let's put it this way: we did not sell it to capacity like Phish did.
Yeah, but it must have been cool to play an arena like that.
No doubt, no doubt. And
Yeah,
we do have a couple other places, like we played the arena in Asheville, and that one we can get like 5 or 6 thousand people out there at night. So
that's awesome.
just we for whatever reason, still working on Charleston, Ryan. Still working.
Yeah. And speaking of fall 2019, they played a pretty fantastic Hood in Providence. It all relates back to the topic.
There you go. Back to Hood. Back to
And
Hood.
that's it. Yeah. So just want to thank you so much, Joel, for coming on today and talking Hood and all this other amazing stuff with me. It's been fantastic.
My pleasure, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to episode 3 of We Move Through Stormy Weather. Hope you have a fantastic day, and we will see you next time.